Hello and welcome to Repair Cafe TV. I'm Don Fick and I'll be your host as we explore the world of repair. Now normally a repair cafe is an in-person workshop where local volunteers get together with area residents to repair stuff. And in the process everyone learns new skills, saves a little money, and breaks the cycle of throw away and buy new. But during the pandemic we're producing these free online events where everyone is welcome to attend at no cost, and you can find more information about these events and register for future ones at repaircafe.tv. So today's show features two of our repair coaches, Cathy Murphy from Cary, North Carolina, and Elizabeth Lord from Durham, North Carolina. And they will be demonstrating the basics of jewelry repair, including earring wires, jump rings, chain repair, and replacing clasps. And today we are using the Zoom webinar package. So if you haven't experienced the webinar in Zoom before, I want you to know that most people will not be visible on the screen. So you will see our coaches and maybe one of our guests at a time as we may discuss your repair project during our Q&A section. But most of the time you will not see a lot of people on screen. But you can participate nevertheless. We do have a chat feature which you can use. So down near the bottom of the screen, you should see a chat button, or maybe you see a more button that you can click and use the chat feature. And that'll be a way for you to ask questions during the program. And I'll try to share those questions with our presenters. I'll do my best. I might miss a few as we go along, but we'll have a chance to wrap up at the end where you can ask your questions via audio. So I'd like to give everybody a chance to try that chat feature right now. If you go ahead and click on that and go ahead and share with us where you're calling in from, share your city and state or your country perhaps, and everybody should be able to see that feedback that you share through the chat. So go ahead and give that a try. I see somebody from New Jersey, Boulder, Colorado. Where else are folks coming in from? Asheville, North Carolina. Durham and Freeville, New York, Saratoga Springs. All right, everybody seems to be finding that feature, and I think we're off and running. We've got folks I know from all around the US, Indiana, upstate New York. So that all looks great. At this point now, it's my pleasure to introduce Cathy and Elizabeth, and I'm going to give them control of the show here. They can go ahead and share their screens. And let's just click a few buttons here. And I'll pass it over to Cathy.
Hey. Hi, everyone. I'm Cathy Murphy. I'm in Cary, North Carolina. Okay. So Elizabeth Lord and I are repair coaches in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area repair cafe. I started by taking a couple jewelry making classes back in the early 90s at an intergenerational summer camp. And I got hooked on beads and beading. So I ended up starting a side business of jewelry making and repair in 1992. And I've made about 4,000 pieces and done a lot of repairs for friends and through word of mouth. And I've really enjoyed the experience of repairing at the Repair Cafe. We never know what's coming in. But speaking of that, what I like to do at Repair Cafe is when somebody signs up, registers, and they something like, I need a clasp replaced on my necklace, I ask Don if they could please send in a picture, because as you'll see with the many different types of materials that jewelry can be made out of, just asking for a clasp is not near enough information. Elizabeth, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Elizabeth Lord. I've been working in jewelry for almost 20 years since my child was born, and I could no longer do counted cross stitch because he would make me lose my counts. I started off with stringing, but then when I came back to the Durham area, I started taking courses through our Raleigh Parks and Recreation. They have a wonderful metal jewelry shop there and some fantastic coaches, and also some fastening classes through NC State. I have sold my jewelry around the country and have shown in some shows, got an award. I have taught some classes on how to make jewelry, and I have just recently started working with the Repair Cafe, really enjoying it a lot. Cathy, back to you.
Thank you. So this is our agenda for tonight. I wanted to go over basic tools and terminology so that we can be on the same page. I'll have some video demonstrations like how to make a loop out of wire, how to replace a lost earring wire or post using a jump ring or split ring, some basics of chain repair, replacing a clasp, using adhesives, repairing a bead weave, and then at the end we'll have slides with additional resources such as how-to videos and some bead resources that Elizabeth and I use. And then we'll have time for questions and your repair issues. And just keep in mind that these are our personal ways of doing things. There are other ways to skin the cat. These are some basic helpful tools. There are round nose pliers, flat nose or chain nose pliers, wire cutters. Those are pretty essential for working with earring replacements, ear wire replacements, changing a clasp, or doing wire work. And then for pieces that need to be strung, beading tweezers, crimping tools, a small tip scissors, and beading needles can be helpful, plus stringing materials, which we'll talk a little bit about. When you're working with jewelry, just be aware that beads roll. And so it's good to have some kind of a fabric surface, a non-roll surface. What I did is I took one of those lap trays that has the styrofoam beads in the bottom, and with double-sided tape, I put a piece of non-roll fabric on top so it keeps my beads contained, and there's a little lip on the tray so it helps prevent runaway beads, because often at repair cafes we're working on conference tables which aren't an ideal surface for things that roll around. And I also reuse salad dressing cups from restaurants to hold little parts. So I've got a collection of those that I reuse when I get them. You can use something like felt or cotton velvet, and they also sell special non-roll bead mats. And there's also a sticky kind of neoprene or silicone mats that also are good. So it doesn't take up much room to have a little roll of fabric in your tool bag. Another thing that's helpful to have is some kind of a magnifier. You can get a jeweler's loop, a little piece that you can put on your eye, or a piece that fits over your head with magnifiers. And I also use a clip-on magnifying lamp that can clip on the end of a table. So those are helpful for seeing small parts. So one of the terms with jewelry work is findings. And findings can mean the parts that don't involve the beads or the gems directly. So they're the other parts that make up jewelry, such as the wires and posts that go in the ear, head pins and eye pins that you often build an earring on or can make chains out of or hang dangles from, jump rings and split rings, mountings and settings, crimp beads, clasps, bails. So those are examples of what we mean by findings. So here's some examples of different kinds of ear wires. On the left is the red one is actually hypoallergenic nylon ear wire, which I thought was kind of interesting for people who have severe metal allergies, that they have things like that, or niobium. And now there's a lot of steel findings that are also hypoallergenic. The next one is called a kidney wire. So it has a little loop on the bottom that secures the end in to help keep it on your ear. And then the earring is hung from the little loop down here. This one is a lever back ear wire. That's also a little more secure than some because it closes up after you have it in your ear. Down on the bottom left is these are fish hook wires, and they have different bottoms. I wanted to show you because if you're having to match something, these types are good to know. This is called a ball and a coil. Let's see if I can increase that. So this, it's just decorative. It has a little coil and a ball at the end. This one just has a ball. This one has a coil only, and this one has no decoration on it. So those are some different types, and you can also see the different kinds of metals. So they come in base metals, nylon, and precious metals, silver, gold, or gold-filled, silver-filled, plated, etc. They also come in different thicknesses. Sometimes a cheap pair of earrings from another country might have really thick wires that might hurt somebody's ears. So you can get them in a finer gauge of wire. And there's also earrings that are hoop shaped. So then another alternative for earrings is to put them on posts or studs. So they've got a thick post that goes in your ear, and these have a little loop on the bottom that you can hang an earring dangle from. And then those need, a type of ear nut to secure on the back of the ear, and they come in different styles. You can get the post separately, you can get the ear nuts separately, or you can get them as sets. A split ring is like a mini keychain, so it's got two loops wrapped around. So it's a very secure piece. It's next best thing to soldering a loop closed, as opposed to jump rings on the right, which can open up, and it makes them useful because they can easily connect two or more parts together, but also depending on the gauge of the wire and the stress on it, it can be opened up. So keep that in mind when you're attaching something. Sometimes, excuse me, the only option is a jump ring, but if it's a very fine, delicate piece, you can get away with a fine gauge of wire, but if there's going to be any weight on it or stress, then a heavier gauge of wire is better. And they come in base metal and precious metals and niobium, aluminum, copper, steel. You can also use those to make your own chain by linking jump rings together, and you can make chain mail out of those too. You can also buy jump rings that are already soldered closed. So that's another secure thing, but then obviously the pieces you're attaching with it will need to be able to open to get into the closed jump ring. And Elizabeth added that you can make your own jump rings by wrapping wire around a cylinder-shaped item like chopsticks. You can get a ring mandrel or jump ring tool and wrap the wire around several times, slide it off, and then make a cut through the coils, and you'll have your own handmade jump rings. Oh, there's example that Elizabeth is showing. Thank you.
This is an example of a jump ring mandrel right here. As you can see, it's just a certain thickness. You would coil the wire around it, pull off the wire, and then cut it with cutters. That's it.
These are examples of different types of clasps. So in the top row, left to right, that's called a toggle clasp, and the straight part goes into the loop sideways. This one has 2 loops on each end, so it's designed for a 2-strand necklace. The next one is a spring ring, because you hold the little lever on the lower left and it'll open up the opening. The next 2 are lobster clasps, That's what those are called, but it opens similar to a jump ring, and they all come in different sizes and shapes. You can get heart-shaped or oval, round, big, little. The one on the right, let's see if I can expand this. I don't know if you can see that too well, but it's called a push clasp. You push the little part in, and that allows you to get it in, and then it snaps back, and so that makes for a pretty secure closing. These parts in the middle are different options that you can use as the other end of the clasp. So this is a chain tag. So that hole could be used for this kind of a clasp, any of those three. Same with just a plain split ring can be the other end of a clasp. And this is called a figure 8. And that can be used as the other end of a clasp. And you can make your own figure 8 out of wire also. The bottom row, we have these two are twist clasps called barrel clasps. This one has square edges, so it's a little easier to grab onto. A round barrel clasp. This is a small magnetic clasp, and I'll show you how to attach one of those later. And these are often used on pearls, so they can be called a pearl clasp, can be called a fishhook clasp because this end of the clasp is shaped kind of like a fish hook, and so you feed it in and then you shove it inside, so it's got that extra little caution. If it comes undone, it's still hanging on to the other end of the clasp. And this is called a hook and eye clasp, so it's just a simple hook that you can also make out of wire and can be attached to this is a flat metal figure 8, or you can use a wire one. So those are just some examples. There's lots of other kinds. Another important component are head pins and eye pins. So a head pin is kind of like a stick pin, except it doesn't have a sharp end. So you can see it's got a head on the bottom, and that's to keep things from slipping off. So a lot of earrings are designed on head pins, and they can also be used to create dangles hanging from a necklace, for example. And they come with different size heads, different gauges, different kinds of metals. If some beads like pearls or seed beads, which are tiny little glass beads, will have smaller holes, so you can get a head pin in a finer gauge of wire. And then this is an eye pin, which has a little loop on the end, and that can be used for, or hanging a dangle from, or connecting to another bead. And it's easy to make your own eye pin because with the round nose pliers, you can easily make a metal loop. And you can also just leave it on the bottom. It's got a bigger head that way. If you have a bead with a big hole, then the eye pin might be enough to hold it on the end of the pin. And Elizabeth added that if you have a butane or a propane torch, you can make your own head pin by making a little ball of metal at the end of a piece of wire. Right? If you use a finer gauge of wire, it's not as secure as a heavier gauge. So one thing you can do is practice making what we call a wrapped loop. So once you make the circle, you wrap the end of the wire around the base of it, and that makes it much less likely to come open. So it's a good way to compromise if you have to use a thinner gauge of wire to get through a bead hole. Then there's stringing material. And picking these are based on the use, the color, the strength, the width, and the texture. So the one on the left is called Soft Flex. That's the brand name. There's also AccuFlex or Tiger Tail. And what they are miniature steel cables coated in nylon. So they're very strong, but they're not as flexible as, say, the cord in the middle. They're very good for beads that have sharp edges like metal or some semi-precious stones or crystals that might have sharp edges that could fray a more thread type of cord. But they also can kink. They're kink resistant, but not kink proof. So there's pros and cons, and I'll show a demonstration with some in the video. Then on the right, let's see, just covered up by the pictures. We have things like fire line, which is like a fishing line, monofilament, and that's nice because it's clear. Then there's elastic cords. This one is kind of hard to see. It's memory wire, so it's made out of spring steel, and so it keeps its shape, and it comes in ring sizes, bracelet sizes, and choker sizes. So you can cut off one loop to make a one-looped bracelet, or you can make multiple coils, and it's easy to string on, and you bend over the ends or put a little ball on the end so the beads don't slip off. And then there's fine beading cord. Is that the Eslon, Elizabeth?
That's Eslon, yes.
I wasn't familiar with that. There's a brand called Nymo too, and they come in all different colors and thicknesses. And then there's also things called tough cord or strength that are synthetic cords. And the nice thing about something like that is that they have a little stiffness to them that for most beads you wouldn't need a needle to use. This cord in the middle comes on a card with a wire needle attached to the cord. So it's handy to have some of those in your repair kit because it's already pre-strung. The needle is just made out of one piece of wire that's been twisted around the edge of the cord. So it's bendable and you can straighten it with pliers or with your fingers because it'll get bent, but it's small enough that it goes through most beads, and it comes in different sizes. This one pictured is a size 4, and you get 2 meters on a card, and it comes in nylon and silk and other synthetics. So that's a carded bead cord. And if you don't have a beading needle and you have a thinner type of cord, you can dab some glue on the end. Make sure you've got a nice clear cut. Dab some glue on it, wait for it to dry, and that can often keep are you showing a demo?
So what I have here is part of a project that I'm halfway through. This is the Eslon, the colored cord, and what I did is I added just a little glue to the end, keeps it nice and stiff. It'll go right through the bead, and it won't fray at the end.
And if it does start to fray, you can just cut off the end and put new glue on. What kind of glue do you use for that, Elizabeth?
I just used Elmer's glue or Aleene's glue. Any kind of white glue will do. Just let it dry. It just takes a few minutes.
Another helpful thing for having on hand for repairs is that you can get kits with various types of findings in them. So you don't have to buy multiple packages of one kind of finding, but this is an example of a kit that has different sizes and colors and thicknesses of jump rings, or split rings rather. And it's very reasonable. They end up being like a couple cents a piece. And this is a kit too that comes with some ear wires and clasps and head pins and eye pins and crimp beads, and even has a tool in it and some stringy material. So those are helpful things to have in a repair kit. So you've got a little bit of everything. But of course, this one comes in one color. So if somebody's got a repair that's gold colored, you'd need to have one in that color too. So onto tools. This is called a round nose pliers. It's different than a needle nose. Sometimes people confuse them, but the ends are totally conical, and they're used for making loops or rings. These are flat nose and chain nose pliers. I think these both here are chain nose. One has a smooth jaw inside, the other one has teeth or is serrated, and they have different uses. The smooth nosed one is good for when you don't want to mar the wire. But the serrated one is helpful if you need to tighten up something and you don't want it to slip around like the smooth pliers will do. Then the one with the teeth helps grab like the outside of a jump ring that you're trying to close. And these can be found at hardware stores or craft stores. And then wire cutters are usually needed. This one pictured as a side cutter. You can also get a flush cutter, which cuts it straight across, and an end cutter. I have a variety of each, but one cutter is typically useful for most repairs. This dangerous looking tool is a beading tweezers. And what that's good for is to help guide a knot to just where you want it. And I'll show a little demo of that in the video. Is if you're making multiple loops for a project and you want the size to be consistent, you can put a little mark with a Sharpie pen on the cone, and then you'll know where to put the wire for the size of loop that you want. And I'll demonstrate that in the video too. Oh, and you want to talk about tool magic?
I do. If you have only one set of pliers and they maybe mar objects, you can use this little tool magic. This white material on the end is a kind of a plastic. It starts off moist or wet, and then it'll dry over about a period of an hour, and it's ready to use on any kind of metal, especially if you're using something that's colored, anodized, or colored copper. This is an inexpensive chain nose pliers that cost me about $5. So this tool magic keeps them from damaging anything.
Thanks.
And excuse me, Cathy and Elizabeth, while we're here, in the chat, there was a question if these pliers are similar to pliers that would be used for electronics. Would you be able to use electrical wire cutters for this kind of work?
Yes. Now, since there's a lot of different gauges of wire that can be worked on, the thing to watch out for is that if you have a thicker gauge of wire, craft tools are typically rated for different gauges of wire. So a memory wire would be a very tough gauge of wire, and if you use the wrong kind of wire cutter, it'll put pits into your cutting edges. I haven't used electrical cutters, but just something that is small enough to get into small openings is helpful. Sometimes cutters will have on them, used for, like, say, 18 to 24 gauge wire, for example. And so anything below that, because the smaller the number, the thicker the gauge. So just be aware, I have some badly pitted cutters from before I knew that rule. But yes, the flat chain nose pliers and wire cutters can all be purchased at hardware stores. I've never seen a round nose pliers or a beading tweezers at a hardware store though. So those would be from craft stores or bead stores.
Thank you.
Sure. This is another little gadget. It's more of a specialty item. It's called a split ring pliers, and it has a little tooth on one of the inside jaws, and you can stick that in the loops of a split ring and it'll hold it open while you feed something onto it. And I said you can also use a fingernail, and I'll demonstrate that. And in the video I called it a split nose pliers, but I'll correct myself now. So I'll jump to the videos, and what I'll be demonstrating is how to make a loop, how to attach a earring wire or post, how to use the beading tweezers and bead tips to add a clasp using some of the beading wire and crimp beads, and adding a magnetic clasp on a metal link bracelet. I'm going to show you how to make a loop out of a head pin. It's got some earring beads on it. So I've got wire cutters, a round nose pliers, a smooth edged chain nose pliers, and a serrated edge chain nose pliers. So I'm going to take off the excess wire and leave about a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters of wire. And when I cut the wire, I put my finger on the end so that it doesn't hit somebody or you end up stepping on it later. So we've got about a 1/2 inch of wire. Now I'm going to take my smooth chain nose and get down to the top bead and make a right angle bend. That will help center the loop. Take the round nose pliers. This end of the cone makes a small loop. This end makes a bigger loop. So I'll do this one in the middle. So you want to get the end of the wire inside the pliers and not sticking out. Make a little bit of a turn towards you, and I'm supporting it with one of my 2 outer fingers so that the beads don't fall off. And then move the pliers down slightly, make another little turn. What you're doing is you're putting a curve into the whole piece of wire, and just keep making a little bit of a turn at a time, and until they meet. And you can take the smooth pliers and give it a squeeze to make sure it's on the same plane, or if it needs straightening you can grab it tightly and tweak it a little. If there's a space in it, you can take the plier with the serrated jaw and give it a little tweak. But if you squeeze too hard, it'll fold over on itself. And we can put it on a post or an ear wire. I'll stick this one on a post. And this post has a loop in the bottom of it. And these come with closed loops or with ones that can open. As this is a closed loop, that means we'll have to open the loop on the earring wire to fit inside there. So the correct way to open a loop is to open it up sideways. So just grab near the end and lift it straight up. You don't want to ruin the circle that's there. So you've got the loop opened, slip it through the loop on the post. Then you take that end of the loop on the earring that you opened, and you're going to grab it, bring it back flush with the other side of the loop. Make sure there isn't any opening for the loop to fall through. And you've got the earring attached to a new post. Thread that on the loop. Grab the end, pull it down as close as you can, and you can use the flat nose to make sure it's tight that way. Check to see if there's any openings that the wire could come through. And that looks pretty good, so you've got your earring on a new wire. So here's a wire link bracelet made of onyx that needs a clasp, and it's lightweight enough that I'll use this magnetic clasp. And I tried pulling one end of this wire out, but it seems pretty secure in there because we could have pulled one end out to loop it through the clasp, but because it feels pretty secure, I'm going to add a split ring, the mini keychain we talked about. And this is the split nose pliers. It has a little tooth coming down that can stick in between the two rings. So you see how that can hold it open. So if we get it in there, then you can use another pliers to turn it around till it is on both loops. There. And then you can use the pliers or your fingernail if you've got one, and just thread that loop of the bracelet on there. And as you can see, the magnetic clasp wants to jump onto the metal tool. Whoops, went too far. Okay, so we've now attached the split ring to the bracelet and the split ring to one side of the clasp. And then just repeat that on the other side. You might just be able to force that in. Okay, so got a new clasp on the bracelet. Here I'll explain knot covers or bead tips, and some uses with the beading tweezers. So most beads that are strung on cord use what's called a bead tip or a knot cover. So the knot is made, and then you slide a bead tip onto the cord. And then after it's strung, I like to put a little clear fingernail polish in against the knot and let it dry. And then cut off the cord close to the knot, but don't cut the knot. This is a clamshell bead tip, so that part can be closed up to cover the knot. And then the loop on the end is used to attach to the clasp. It's pretty soft metal and it forms a loop around the loop on the clasp. So I've strung some beads on this cord, and these look a little odd, but what they actually are is these were original glass Mardi Gras beads made in Czechoslovakia, the old Czechoslovakia. They had a lot of glass bead factories there, and they would make up these odds and ends strands at the end of the day, and they were originally used as Mardi Gras beads. But when people started throwing them around, they went to the cheap plastic. But that's why this is an odd assortment. So, one of the things you can do with the beading tweezers is to tie a knot, like you would knot between pearls. And what you do is you get your loop and you stick the tweezers inside the loop, grab the cord, push it down close to the bead, and the beading tweezers guides the knot right down next to the bead, and then you push it down with your fingers. So that's how the beading tweezers is great for moving a knot down close to where you want it. And this beading cord is stiff enough that you don't need to use a needle for most applications. So I'll do that again. Tie a knot, stick the tweezers through the hole, grab the necklace cord, and pull the cord down. Give it a tug and push it down with your fingers. When you're done with the necklace, you have to put the bead tip on the other end. So this time you string it through from the bottom because the knot is going to go inside. And I will tie a double knot. And same thing, now I'm going to use the bead tweezers to get the knot tight down inside the bead tip. So I'm going to pull on the cord, make sure the cord doesn't go around the bead tip. Push it down tightly, and then you can also use the tweezers to seat it in there. Then I would put the drop of clear nail polish on both of those ends. It helps keep the knot end from fraying. It just, if you use something like super glue, it tends to run down the cord and make this all stiff, and then it can break when it's bent. So clear nail polish remains flexible. So then, once that's done, you would cut off the excess with the smaller scissors typically. And then with a flat nose pliers, can close it up. Let's see, where's the one with the teeth, so it won't slip. So just close the cup up gently. So you can see that's closed. And then you have an end to loop through a clasp. And here I have a push clasp. So I'll thread that through, and then you can take a round nose or a flat nose and take that loop close it inside. And then you've got secure clasp, and you can use the serrated pliers again to just tweak it if it's not totally closed. And it's soft metal, so you don't want to squeeze it too hard. And then do the same on the other side with the other end of the clasp. So this is called a clamshell bead tip. It totally covers the knot when it's shut. This is an open cup bead tip, so the knot can still be somewhat visible from the top, but it has a smaller profile, and they can be a little stronger too. But that's how you put a clasp on a cord with bead tips. Now, if the clasp has come off and the bead tip is still there, you can try gently opening the bead tip and see. Sometimes over time the metal will get stressed and it's not safe to reuse a bead tip. But if you gently try opening it, and oops, wrong side, and it feels pretty secure, you could stick a new clasp on it. So if it looks like that, you can put a new clasp on it. Otherwise, if it's broken off here, chances are it would need to be restrung. Another option would be is if you put a knot in another piece of cord, maybe with a needle, and strung the string up, and then you have a new cord that you could tie the end on.
Excuse me, Kathy.
Yes.
We have a question in the chat. Dennis asks, how does one prevent the loop from pulling open?
You have to gauge what kind of weight and stress is going to be on the piece. So some of these, I've gotten some decorative bead tips that were pretty flimsy, and so I just don't use those because it can come open. The cup ones, not the clamshell ones that I've used, tend to be stronger. What's your experience, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I just answered in the chat that the type of metal you use, like when I use them for chainmail and other uses, I have to be careful that the metal is not super soft. So metals come in, spring steel, for instance, is very, very strong, and that's what the kind of metal we showed before, making a choker, making a bracelet that stays attached to your arm without a clasp. But we have to be particularly careful of what kind of metal we're using. We want a good anneal, not annealed metals. If you're familiar with annealing, you warm the metal, it becomes very pliant. So we will work the metal until it's no longer pliant. So sometimes I'll take a jump ring and I'll just keep working it until I feel like it's stiff enough that it won't open on its own due to stresses. So metal is altogether different animal when dealing with jewelry. Anybody who's dealt with metal before and needs to hold a stress understands that part. So that comes with experience.
Was the question about the loops in a bead tip or loops in general?
Dennis wasn't specific. We can ask him to clarify that, or oh, he says loops in general. Okay.
Yeah, like that wrapped loop that I showed, that makes an open loop more secure by wrapping the end around the base of the loop. You can also, depending on the application, hammer it. Like you can make your own ear wires or loops, and if the application is suitable, by hammering it on a little anvil or some piece of steel, hammering it can make it heavier. But if you're concerned about a jump ring opening, then you would use a heavier gauge of a jump ring or a split ring if possible, because a split ring is more secure than a jump ring. But jump rings can work for, they can have a pretty indefinite life if the gauge of the wire is suitable to the weight of the piece. Now, when I've been asked to repair a chain with loops, I typically check all the loops in the chain and make sure that they're all tight, the jump rings, because often that they can open up over time. And so I just, before I return it, I make sure that all the jump rings are securely closed. Does that help?
I think so. Thank you. And we can certainly come back to more of those questions after the presentation.
Another common type of stringy material is nylon-coated wire. This is brand Soft Flex, and you can see it says it's got 3 strands with 7 wires each per strand, and I believe it's coated in nylon. So it's flexible, it's fray resistant, but it's not as flexible as a cord, and it can be kinked if you bend it. And the kinks are permanent. So it's not good for something that somebody's going to be twisting around. But if you need something strong and heavy, this is smaller gauge, 0.014, and you can get it up into the like 0.24. But these are typically used with crimp beads, and they come in tubes or little round crimps. So the trick with this is to stick one end of the cord through the crimp bead and then thread the clasp on. Take the end of the cord and put it back through the crimp bead. So what you're doing is you're making a loop out of the cable, out of the wire. And you can either squeeze it tight with a flat pliers, or there are several fancy crimping tools that make a rounder bead, but for now I'll just use the serrated flat nose pliers. Give it a good squeeze. It flattens it out, and you can see that I can't move it. It has secured the two wires, and then you would just string the beads on and reverse that on the other end. But that makes a loop. You don't need the bead tip. So that's using a crimp bead on soft flex wire.
So another finding that we didn't really talk about are settings or mountings. And you may know the term cabochon. Cabochon can be stone, glass, plastic, shell, like cameos are often made out of carved shells. And they typically have a flat back and a flat or a domed or rounded top. And sometimes they make these from semi-precious stone that is opaque, because if it's opaque, there's no point in faceting it because the light won't shine through it. So it's typical that cabochons can fall out of their mountings or settings. And so Elizabeth has good experience with adhesives, and she'll talk about that. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, adhesives can be a personal choice. For me, I enjoy using the E6000 adhesive. I've been using it a long time. This one that you see on the screen here says specifically for jewelry and bead, but I don't think it's any different than your general E6000. I find mine at my local hardware store, but also at any local craft store in the adhesive section. This one you see here comes with tips, which means that you can direct it more easily. Now, to be honest with you, you're going to have to use all those tips because it'll dry in there and then that tip is useless. So I tend to just put a little bit of dab of that E6000 on a piece of plastic, and then I'll use a toothpick to direct it better. Downside is it does string. Also, the other downside is it takes about 72 hours to cure completely. Upside of it curing slowly is that you can reposition whatever item it is, a cabochon, anything that you want to attach it to. You can reposition it within a few minutes of applying it. The next one over is the instant adhesive, the Loctite. That's like super glue. You could use that on a setting if you don't have to reposition. The downside I feel about this kind of glue is that it's somewhat brittle. If you've ever worked with super glue, it does get brittle over time. I don't feel it works well with any temperature changes, etc. Next to that, you'll see a two-part epoxy. This two-part epoxy has to be distributed evenly on each side. Once again, you apply it onto a piece of plastic. You mix the two parts together using a toothpick, and then you can apply it to your item. It dries relatively quickly. It is also a very strong adhesive, not terribly forgiving. So you want to clean it off pretty quickly. The one to the right, the last one, is called hypocement. I'm going to show you the end of that. You see the tiny little end? It smells a little bit of xylene also. This, you can use the fingernail polish, or you can use this hypocement to secure your knots. It dries extremely fast and very securely and very supplely. So those are the adhesives that I like to work with, or you might see in craft stores for jewelry use.
Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry, if you could go back to that slide one more time. You'll see at the bottom here, Beading is one of the better YouTube channels, and they do have one specifically as a tutorial about adhesives. They may go into some others that I didn't discuss tonight. Once again, it is a personal choice, and I'm sure a lot of other people might have a desire for other kinds. But that's all I got.
Elizabeth, we have a question from the chat. Jane in STEM, North Carolina asks, I have a wild horse stone earring that fell out of its setting. What glue should I use?
I would go with the E6000. It has lots of uses beyond jewelry. And like I said, it seems to cope very well with all kinds of circumstances.
Thank you.
I was happy to have Elizabeth cover this because my experience with adhesives is that the first one I try, even if it's recommended for my materials, doesn't stick, and then I have to try a second kind, and that doesn't work, and then I have to try a third kind. So I've had several instances where it's been the third glue that worked, no matter what kind it was. So, and once you've got the cabochon glued back, if it needs to be rehung, this decorative thing on the end is called a bail, and that's what's used to hang a pendant from, usually from a necklace. And you can use a decorative one or just a plain split ring. Split rings or jump rings can be used if you have to reattach it to a necklace that's already strung. Whereas something like this, it doesn't open here, so it would have to be strung onto the necklace in between the beads, or it could be strung on a chain. If there aren't any beads on it, it could be strung on a chain to hang from the front. So that's what a bail is. Chains, I can talk a little bit about this. Chains that have loops are obviously easier to repair. If a chain is broken, you can see if the loops are soldered shut. If they're not, or even if they are, sometimes you can use a wire cutter to cut the end loop open and treat it like a jump ring and attach it to the next loop. If that doesn't work, you can find a jump ring that's similar color and shape and size. So here I've used one of a different color just to show you, whoops, that you can use a jump ring or a split ring to connect the two missing part, the two loose parts. And Elizabeth added this tutorial for, it's a good video for chain repairs. And this will be in the PDF that Don will send out. This kind of a chain is, whoops, this kind of a chain is harder to repair because it doesn't have obvious loops. But in this case, it does have a little loop at the end. So if the clasp came off, there is something that you could attach a jump ring through, or a piece of wire to make your own jump ring. So that's something that having a magnifying glass will help you determine if there's any kind of a loop at the end that you can use to attach a new clasp. Once I had a chain like this that was broken, and the only way I could think to fix it was to take a big crimp bead and stick both ends into the crimp bead. The woman was pleased to have I put one matching one on each side, and she wanted a pendant in the middle. So that was the only thing I could think of, other than if you have special soldering skills. But you know, and I think of this when buying new chains, that a cable type chain with loops is going to be easier to repair than something like this. And then I'll turn this one over to Elizabeth for the
well, if I can ask Cathy, since you did mention soldering, I know typically we don't, we have not in our Repair Cafe events been doing soldering on jewelry, but could you comment on, you know, what kind of jewelry solders are available, and when is the best time to use them?
That's out of my wheelhouse.
I can probably take that one a little bit, since I took jewelry courses using metal jewelry. There are jewelry solders out there. We typically order them from jewelry vendors that do metal work. You use tiny little pieces, you put the two pieces of metal together and you heat them, and the solder melts between the two pieces of metal. The solder tends to be a silver color, so you want to try to avoid it spilling out through the edges, you know, as if you squish like a s'mores and you got the marshmallow coming out. It's similar to that if you have too thick of a solder piece in between. And then you can just take a propane, butane, or acetylene torch and heat that solder, and it should sandwich together and seal it. You asked the question earlier about what adhesive might work. That's a really good question. I have never tried to do that with two pieces of metal. If the two pieces of metal are thin, you could probably get away with adhesive. I don't know for how long. It all depends on the kind of metal you've got, thinness, etc. If you go into your craft store, the adhesive section, kind of glance at some and see if they say they're rated for metal. That's the only thing I can think of. Repairing a bead weave, you have a picture here. This one's a single strand necklace, obviously very simple. You would just take a long piece of beading line and you would just restring it. But if you have something a little bit more complex, I have this piece right here. You can kind of see it's woven back and forth. So if any section of this was to break and the beads were to fall out, all is not lost. You can recover those beads, try and match the material, and go to your store and get the thread that best matches it. And then you would start above the break, weave it through, and below the break, and then you would just tie the two lines together, thread them through so that they're hidden on both the upper and lower parts. So you can recover the bead weave. This one is a little more complicated. This is called right angle weave. So you could look up the different kind of weaves available and kind of get an idea of how they were woven together. Or you could find somebody who knows how to do a bead weave to put them back together in the proper locations. But you don't have to throw that bracelet or necklace away just because some beads have fallen off of it. But that's the reason why you want to use the proper kind of thread or material of that nature. I used in this piece some Swarovski crystals. These have sharp edges, so I tend to use things like the Fireline. Fireline is actually fishing line, comes in different widths and different strengths, just like fishing line does. It originally was fishing line, and people kept buying it for jewelry use. Comes in clear, comes in smoke. So, however, if you have some very narrow beads, like pearls, you tend to want to use the Nymo or the silk, because those have very, very narrow holes, but they tend to be a little bit more forgiving as far as breakage. I have an example on YouTube. Also, I think it was Beadaholic. Very good on how to take two pieces of woven material and fix that break. So please do watch that YouTube. That's all I got on that.
Thank you. One of the things I've done at repair cafes is, if something requires restringing, is show them how to get it started, let them do the actual restringing, and then show them how to put the clasp on the end. And that way they can be part of the repair. Here's an example. Not everything is best for a repair. This is an example of an old broken bead tip. You can see that it's discolored and it's broken off. So obviously that couldn't be used to attach a new clasp to. And in addition, it's got a fraying end that's sticking out of the beads. So the cord is too old and fragile to reuse. So I would recommend restringing this piece. Plus it's got a pendant where some of the beads have fallen off. So I would not recommend just a straight repair, but so these are some of the resources that Elizabeth and I recommend. You can do a web search to find local bead or craft stores. Here we have Michael's, Joann Fabrics, Walmart, that are about our only, some of the few remaining bead stores in the area, or stores that have beads and findings and tools. One of the things we have here are traveling gem and bead shows, or even gem and mineral shows usually have bead vendors and tool vendors. We have them at the state fairgrounds several times a year, or we did before the pandemic. but they can be great places where you've got, you know, like 60 shops under one roof. And sometimes they have demonstrations there too. So you can, here's a website for looking for bead shows or looking for rock and mineral shows that might be coming to your area. And then online you can get tools and parts from on Etsy, eBay, Amazon. And then we listed 3 reputable companies, Fire Mountain, Rio Grande, and Beading. Rio Grande would have soldering materials and a lot of actual fancy jewelry making tools like setting tools and different kind of metalworking equipment. And then Beading. And these are 4 places that have really good online tutorials on different topics. So again, these will be in the PDF. But there are a lot of excellent videos out there. Here's an example of a page showing the Fire Mountain video on using crimps. And here are some examples I copied from Joanne's fabric website. Gives you an idea of a small packet of lobster clasps you can buy. There's a little package of 5 different tools, so that would be an inexpensive way to, this is $16 for 5 different tools. And you know, they wouldn't be good if you wanted to have a long career of professional jewelry making, but they will certainly stand you well in a repair cafe. And here are some head pins, so you can buy just 10 of them at a time. So that's the end of our official presentation, and now we're open to questions, or if you have broken pieces you want to hold up to the camera.
I would like to go back to that question about bonding 2 different metals together. And I know we talked a little bit about different adhesives, but would a 2-part epoxy be maybe the best choice for putting 2 metals together?
All I can say is you can give it a try. I don't know of any adhesive that is rated for 2 metals. I'm just ignorant. So as I said, go to the section in the craft store and look at the back of the packaging. It'll tell you what materials it's rated for.
I know a lot of the other repair coaches would probably reach for some JB Weld, which is
yes.
a popular one, but maybe not the best looking for jewelry repairs.
I would have to see the piece, see how thick it is, see what kind of metal it is. It's all dependent on that.
Okay. Let's see. Barbara has a question, and Barbara, you're able to talk. You may need to unmute your phone.
Yeah.
Here you are. And Barbara, where are you calling from tonight?
I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York. I have to
welcome.
get the film going so I can show you this. There we go. Start my video.
Here you are.
So these are the 2 metal pieces. It's a head. It's very old. It's a head and a thing, and it goes like this. That's what I was talking about. I was thinking about using this GB Weld stuff because I don't know, or maybe I should go somewhere.
It won't do any harm to give it a try. If it doesn't want to stick, it'll come apart and you can try something else.
Right. Okay.
I'm sorry, Barbara, we can't hear you.
I just wanted to also show it to you because I think it's just such a cool piece.
It is
Very cool.
a nice piece. One thing to consider with JB Weld, by default, it's going to be black. And so if you have any material that then presses through and you see it, it may discolor. E6000 may be a better place to start since it is clear.
Oh, right.
And then maybe a little bit easier to remove if it doesn't give you the results you expect.
Right.
Do you all agree with that? Elizabeth, you're on mute, but
I keep pressing the unmute button, it goes back. Barbara, some epoxies do come up through clear. So you can try an epoxy first that is clear instead of the JB Weld. I'm not familiar with JB Weld, so if it's black, I wouldn't use it because it'll squish around the edges. But there are clear epoxies out there. Ice resin makes a good epoxy that's clear. That's sold at Michael's stores if you have any near you.
Yeah, there's one.
Has anyone tried bonding metals with Sugru?
I have not, no. And then Dennis in the chat mentions that if you're going to use something like JB Weld, make sure that the two surfaces that you're gluing together are clean first, using something like some sort of a solvent like naphtha or something else that would clean off any residual oils that might be on there.
I tend to use Penny, was it Penny? I'm trying to remember the name of it. It cleans coppers and so forth. That with the green scrub cloth. If you're concerned about scratching or marring, it won't scratch or mar metals. I have to go under my sink and check and see what that's called.
So does anyone else have any other questions, Barbara, before we let you go?
Oh, that's
Okay, thanks very much. And let's see. Does anyone else?
There's a question for you, Don.
Yes. There is a question for me?
Isn't there an upcoming glue?
Oh, there is an upcoming glues presentation. So in a month from now, our next Repair Cafe TV episode, I hope to do a presentation on glues, and it's going to be focused more on kind of common general purpose glues, not so much on specialty glues. So we'll be covering the gamut, everything from Elmer's through to JB Weld and other kinds of adhesives that you kind of want to have as your maybe go-to household adhesives. Everything for fixing, things in the garage, things in the kitchen, wherever you may be. So they'll be coming up on September 16th. And so information about that is available at repaircafe.tv, and you can also register like you did for tonight.
And I see a question about pearls breaking off by the clasp. So that's Hannah. It depends on if the bead tip is still attached, and if it's still usable, then a new clasp could be put on. How old are the pearls, or when was the last time they were restrung? 50 years?
50
Okay.
years, yes.
Then I recommend that they be restrung. Actually, jewelry stores recommend that they be restrung every year, which I think is a little excessive, but I did do restringing for a jewelry store for 6 months. And the reason that there's two reasons pearls are knotted between. Are yours knotted in between, Hannah?
We're going to allow Hannah to talk to us with her microphone. So Hannah, you can unmute your phone or computer.
They were restrung about 10 years ago, but they're like 50 years old. And the first time I went to use them, it broke between the first pearl and the clasps. I think she probably knotted it too tight so that the metal severed it, but I really don't know.
So they are knotted in between, right?
Yes, they are.
The only other option besides restringing would be, like I showed with the necklace with the bead tips, is that you could take a fine beading needle with some cord and tie a little knot around the existing pearls, a few pearls down, and pull that up and add a knot in between the last couple pearls, and then you'd have that cord. If you can fit a needle and a cord through the existing holes, it might be too tight. It depends on the thickness of the cord and the knots that are in there. You might not be able to get another cord through. But even if you try it on the last pearl to string another piece of beading cord through there, that would give you something to attach a new clasp to. Or did the whole clasp come off, or just tear off at one end?
Tore off in between. Yeah, just severed right out. But the clasp is fine and the last bead was fine. And I was just lucky that I caught it before it fell.
Yeah.
Would you recommend gluing the new string into it?
Not if it's knotted at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Or did it have bead tips on it, or was the cord just strung right through the clasp?
I believe it was through the clasp. I'll have to check the other side.
Yeah, I prefer to use bead tips on pearls, but I know that professionally they're often done where they attach the cord right around the clasp, and then you have fewer options if that breaks.
I'm sorry, what was the term that you used? It was the pearl clasp. I believe you said it was a fishtail. That's the kind it was.
Fish hook, yeah, okay.
Fish hook, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's if it was strung with bead tips, then you still have that, hopefully that little loop on the end that you could reattach the clasp to. So that's why I don't like the cord going directly around the loop in the clasp. And like you said, then it tends to have more friction on the end of the cord.
I'm gonna give it a try. Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Where are you calling us from, Hannah?
The Mid-Hudson Valley region of New York State.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to, we have some time left for some additional questions. If anybody wants to raise their hand or post a question in the chat. I think I have covered all the questions we have open right now in the chat.
Oh, I forgot something. I was going to explain why pearls are knotted. So the knot keeps the pearl finishes from rubbing against each other. So the nacre, that's the finish from the shell, can be worn off. So by putting a knot in between, it protects the finish of the pearls. And also if it breaks, you tend not to have 50 pearls laying on the floor. You only might lose one between the knots. So those are the two reasons that pearls or more valuable beads are knotted in between.
And I think, unless I've goofed, I think Hannah has raised her hand again. So let's see. Hannah, did you have another question?
I do, please. So I have 2 strands of pearls that are almost the same length. Would you recommend them not being worn together so that they don't rub against each other?
Yeah, it wouldn't be ideal. Another thing with pearls is that makeup and hairspray can be very detrimental to the finishes. So when they're restrung, they typically gently wash them too with a very gentle detergent to keep anything like that from building up on them.
It's true with opals as well. They absorb an awful lot of unwanted materials.
And is it true that opals need to be worn periodically because they are hydrophilic, and so they need to have moisture to stay solid and not crack?
Yeah, they have a high volume of water in them.
Or you can store them in some kind of oil, right? Did I hear?
Right, yeah, yeah.
And then Elizabeth, in the chat, you mentioned, you clarified that Penny Bright was the metal cleaner that you were referring to earlier?
Right. So before we get to soldering any metals, we clean any oils or dirt off of them, and we tend to use the Penny Bright and the green scrub pads. Neither of those will scratch the surface of the metals. So those are the safest thing to use to clean off oils and dirt before applying either solder or adhesive.
And probably as a standard disclaimer, always test in an inconspicuous spot first, right?
Exactly. And then the way you know it's clean is if the water beads off of it, like water beads off of a waxed car.
Okay. All right. So any other questions, Hannah, before we let you go?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. Special thanks to Cathy and Elizabeth for the time they put into preparing for tonight's presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it. And this has been recorded. We will make it available on YouTube and Facebook. And we will be sending out emails to advise you of the upcoming event in September. Want you to encourage you to check out repaircafe.tv. We don't just list our Repair Cafe online events, but other organizations, including Fix-It clinics, do have events around the world. They're not all of the same format. A lot of them are sort of more general interest repair, and so you're welcome to tune into those. And I want to thank everybody for participating tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again, perhaps on September 16th when we talk about glue. So I hope you all have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you again. Take care.
Thank you all. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you all.